This video is brought to you by NordVPN. In the years since the invasion of Ukraine, countries from around the world have flooded Kyiv with aid and support to beat back the Russians. As war wages on in Eastern Europe, many nations are looking for ways to prepare for the next major conflict, with all eyes nervously focused on Taiwan. The country most concerned is, unsurprisingly, the United States, which has been building a web of alliances with the intention to deter and perhaps even defeat China. So in this video, we're going to take you through every US alliance in the Pacific region, how they might develop, and how they stack up against China. We're going to look at 6 anti-China alliances in this video. The first 3 involve countries with big militaries or economies, and are the most geopolitically significant. The last 3 are alliances with smaller countries, but still worth keeping an eye on. Let's start with AUKUS, a trilateral defence pact between the US, UK and Australia. AUKUS is by far the largest effort to form a defensive bulwark against China. The pact consists of 3 phases, each meant to increase the number of allied ships in South Asian waters and improve each nation's defence industrial base. The first phase is focused on increasing ties between the US and Australia in the near term. So, starting this year, US subs will be increasing their visits to Australian ports, while Australians begin increasing their investments in American shipbuilding. This all comes on the heels of a $2.4 billion appropriation in the US 2023 budget for increased submarine shipbuilding. The second phase is when things get a bit more dynamic. UK and US submarines will start joint training and patrols under a newly constructed command, Submarine Rotational Force West. Starting operations in the mid-2030s out of Perth in Western Australia, this rotational force will be used to train Allied submarines to carry out repairs and operate advanced nuclear submarines. This will come in especially handy for the Australians, who are set to purchase 3 Virginia-class nuclear submarines as part of this deal. Finally, the AUKUS partnership will culminate in the late 2030s with the design and production of the SSN AUKUS, a new and jointly designed class of advanced nuclear-powered submarine to be produced in both the UK and Australia. This focus on submarines isn't a coincidence. Taiwan has long talked up the importance of submarines as an essential component of asymmetric warfare in the case of a Chinese invasion. Second on the list is the US-Japan alliance. There's a lot of history here, but the most recent development is a joint project on protecting against hypersonic weapons, which the Chinese first tested in 2021. While just in the early planning stages for now, the US and Japan are working with both Raytheon Technologies and Northrop Grumman to develop a glide phase missile interceptor, capable of downing hypersonic missiles as they glide towards their targets after launch. There were recent reports that an American Patriot anti-missile system downed a Russian hypersonic missile in Ukraine, which has put some hope into the project. It's also worth mentioning here that last year, Japan unilaterally declared its intention to increase military spending by 20%, reaching 2% of GDP by 2027. The final major alliance is between South Korea and the US. They've been stepping up their defence cooperation in response to the acute threat posed by North Korea and their relationship with China. During his recent visit to the White House, South Korean President Yoon signed an agreement which will see the US nuclear-armed submarines dock in Korean ports, similar to the AUKUS deal. Now, while President Biden emphasised that the US was not going to be stationing nuclear weapons on the peninsula, which would violate non-proliferation treaties, it's still a significant step. So those are the 3 US-led alliances in the region, but they're not the only ones. The US has also been upgrading its security relationship with other smaller Asian countries that share America's anxiety about China's rise. Let's start with the US's relationship with the Philippines. The US and the Philippines have a complicated history, but they currently share a mutual suspicion of China's military activity, especially in the South China Sea. In April, the 2 countries announced the creation of 4 new missile sites to act primarily as supply points and performed a joint military drill involving over 1,700 soldiers, live-fire exercises, and a boat-sinking rocket assault. Due to the Philippines' closeness to Taiwan, it makes this partnership essential to facilitate any US material support to the island in case of Chinese attack, and arguably the most important geostrategically. So it makes sense that the United States is investing in its relationship with the Philippines. The fifth alliance we're looking into is India, who is also a key partner from the US's perspective if they want to contain China. Despite both being members of BRICS, India-China relations have been pretty tense for the last few years. For India, this is mainly due to border conflicts and China's close relationship with Pakistan, India's main rival. China, on the other hand, doesn't like India's support of anti-Chinese interests in the South China Sea, such as recently forging strong ties with Vietnam and Indian parliamentarians, hosting the Tibetan government in exile, a group China deems as separatist. While the US and India doesn't really have a bilateral military relationship, India is part of the Quadrilateral Security Dialogue, or Quad, a strategic security dialogue with Australia, Japan and the United States, in which all countries involved regularly hold naval drills such as the Malabar exercises, and have done so since the 1990s. Quad is also expected to hold a summit later this month to talk about how to counter Chinese influence in the Pacific. Lastly, let's talk about the most unlikely ally the US has in Asia, Vietnam. Now, we all know what you're thinking. How could Vietnam be friends with the United States, particularly given the Vietnam War and the two countries' deep ideological differences? Well, again, a mutual distrust of China is the driving force behind this new relationship. China and Vietnam have a troubled past. They fought a border war in 1979, and Vietnam is increasingly wary of China's aggressive posture in the South China Sea. When it comes to the US, since President Clinton's lifting of the US trade embargo on Vietnam in the late 1990s, the two countries have steadily expanded their economic ties, and the United States is now Vietnam's second largest trading partner behind China. Pew Research polling also suggests that the Vietnamese public are overwhelmingly pro-American and anti-China. 84% of Vietnamese apparently have a favourable view of the United States, which is pretty astonishing given their history, while just 10% have a favourable view of China. Military relations are limited by Vietnam's 3 no's principle, which means no military alliances, no foreign troops stationed on Vietnamese soil, and no partnering with a foreign power to combat another. But in 2018, Vietnam cooperated with US naval vessels during the Pacific Rim exercises, and US Secretary of State Antony Blinken recently invited Vietnam to further upgrade its security ties. So those are the main US-led alliances in the Asia-Pacific. Clearly, America is still the go-to for these countries anxious about China's rise, but whether all these alliances deter or accelerate a US-China conflict is an open question. A few weeks ago, we were invited to Downing Street, where we were briefed on the government's anti-fraud plan. As part of this, we found out that more younger people have fallen victim to online scams than over 35s. And as our analytics frequently tell us, our audience skews younger, which means that you're likely in this age bracket. So if you want to protect yourself online, you should try NordVPN. NordVPN has a bunch of tools that keep you safe. First, they have a feature called Threat Protection, which protects you from malware, trackers, malicious ads, and phishing scams. But that's not all. NordVPN also has dark web monitoring services, which, even if you somehow do fall victim to online fraud or scams, notifies you if your details end up online, so you can promptly change your passwords and keep yourself protected. And what's more, if technology isn't really your thing, don't worry. NordVPN offers 24/7 customer support and even a 30-day money-back guarantee for all users. So check out our link in the description to get your discount on their 2-year plan, plus 4 extra months on top of that. Thanks for your support.